All right. Are we on? We good? How many people took a snapshot of your lunch? Anybody do it? Everybody felt guilty now? Shamed you out of taking pictures of your lunch? How'd the conversations go? Good, good. Anything that came out of your conversations that you're like, this came up as a question, or you just like to edify the rest of the group? Edify, one of those words that sounds really weird to non-believers. Anything? No thoughts? All right, we'll keep going then. So we're going to get into the very kind of practical. Okay, what does this mean as I try to build a community group? And one thing I realized as we talked about engaging in mission and thinking like a missionary that we didn't address, that is really important for us to address as we step into this, is just what does it look like to be on mission as a community? And when we generally talk about mission, we're talking about evangelism, we're talking about proclaiming the gospel, reaching people for Christ. Generally speaking, this isn't universal, but generally speaking, in the past, a lot of evangelism that was taught to do evangelism individually. Right? How many of you went through some type of evangelism class that helped you share your story, your testimony, and how to engage people with the gospel in a one-on-one conversation setting? How many people had some type of that training, right? Okay, so most of you. How many of you have ever had a training on how to do evangelism as a community of people? No one. One or two? We rarely ever talk about doing evangelism as a community. To me, that's somewhat odd when I read the Bible, because it's actually fairly rare when we see one-on-one evangelism. We see it in a few places, but we don't. Most of the time, when that's occurring, when the proclamation of the gospel is occurring, it's occurring within a group of people. So when I took evangelism classes, I was in college, I came to Christ, learned how to ask these questions. So I would get I snowboarded at the time. I was much cooler in my younger days. I'd get somebody on the chairlift, and then I'd just start to waggle it a little bit. What would you do if you died today? I didn't really do. Well, actually, I did do that, but I had a cross on my board, so it was totally legit. And what we did in those classes is like you learned how to tell your story, explain your story, and how you encountered Jesus and how that affects your life, and then you would invite them into that. And that worked. Was fairly effective, I would say a generation ago, where the question was, is what you're saying true? And if it's true, then I'd be very interested in belonging to your church. The problem is that culture has shifted to not being so interested in do you have the right proof, but is the proof in the pudding, right? Like does the community that you belong to actually reflect what you're talking about? So they don't just want to know. They don't want you to tell them that your life has been changed. They want to see what happens when you lose your job, or when someone sins against you, or when you sin against someone else. They want to see, is this community any different than the rest of the communities that I interact with on a daily basis? You're telling me that Jesus is different, but when someone sins against you, you get bitter and you gossip and you malign them. Like, that's what you do, and that's what the guys at work do. So why are you any different? What they want to see is that when they come into our community, that those things are different, right? That we forgive one another, that we ask for forgiveness, that we acknowledge our sin, that we confess it, that we forgive one another. They want to see something real, that we actually, though we are at times self-centered, that we repent of that sin and we begin to think of other people. They want to see the realness of that. And that's really hard to do as an individual, because all you can do is tell them. And you may be able to show them one-on-one, but within a community, that becomes really evident. Has the gospel made a difference in this community? You guys see that? So when we're talking about that question about how do I be a missionary, it's the idea of how do I engage my whole community in interacting with my neighbors, my coworkers, but specifically those people that God brings to us. How do we interact with them in such a way that they see not how we want to portray ourselves, but how we actually are? Like the real who we are, which isn't, cleaned up and putting on our Sunday best, but is like, this is how I come after work, stressed, frustrated, and full of anxiety. And when I come here, I'm a lot more quick-tempered than I am on Sunday, but this is who I am, and the community still accepts me and forgives me and works through it. So when we talk about engaging here, we're talking about doing that as a community as a whole. You guys see that? That's what we're trying to get to. So to get there, one of the things that someone had mentioned earlier, I think there's a couple questions. One was, do we ever just talk about engage on the what we do? And we do at times, engage there. And we're going to talk about that. And there was the question about, what was the question? The question was, like, what do we do if, like, people find the gathering in our living rooms awkward? What if that's the barrier? And so to do that, I talk about this in the book, but I know that most of you that receive the book, you use it as a doorstop. I get it. Or you put it on your shelf to make it look like you read more books than you do. Do the same thing. Guilty as charged. So when trying to understand how do we engage with people, I was doing some research in different ways of interacting, and I came across this guy. His last name was Hall, and he was doing these studies on what he talked about, the unwritten rules of society. So what he was saying is that culturally what he found was that there was just these unwritten rules in the way that you and I interact with one another, that based on how well we know one another, we interact differently. And this wasn't a Christian study. This was just a psychological study on the interaction of people. And what he found is that there were what he called, I think he called 4 spheres of I think there was 4 spheres or circles or something of interaction. And what he found was, we're going to call them spaces, is that there were 4 of those spaces. And he said that there was a public space, there was a social space, there was a personal space, and there was an intimate space. What's that? Public, social, personal, and intimate. Did I spell it wrong? I just spelled it scratchy. And so what he found is he said that when we're in these different spaces, we interact with each other, or we interact with people differently. And this is based on how well we know each other. And he actually put distances to this. So intimate space was 0 to 18 inches. Personal space was 18 inches to 4 feet. Social was 4 feet to 12 feet. And public space was 12 feet plus. And he said, when we know someone at these different levels, this is the amount of space we get them. This is if you ever wondered about your personal bubble isn't static. It actually changes based on how well you know somebody. So, for example, when you walk into a movie theater, a movie theater is tough because when you walked into here, was anyone the first person in here this morning? You felt like you were the first person. You had a clean slate. Somebody was. Anybody? Well, one of you was the first person. So when you came in, you sat wherever you wanted. No restraints, only depending on whether you're a front row student or a back row student, right? That's the only thing that determined it. The second person to sit down, was someone the second? I thought I saw a hand. Second person to sit down, if you were a stranger, if you didn't know the person that was already there, you sat about 12 feet away from them. Like you looked at where they were at and you saw it 12 feet. Why 12 feet? You don't know him very well, so you don't want to be weird and sit next to him, right? Would it have been odd? Would it have been odd if you were the first person and someone that you didn't know sat right next to you? Would that have been odd? That would have been a little weird, right? Now, you don't want to sit 40 feet from them because then it looks like you're avoiding them, right? So 12 feet is about this is essentially the norm. So like if you go to a park this afternoon and someone's there having dinner with their children and you go and just do this, just go spread a blanket right next to them and see if they react, right? Because if you're 12 feet away, they won't care. If you sit right next to them, they're going to think that's odd, right? And what he said is, and you move into social space, if you know someone socially, someone from work, someone from church, you would have sat in the same row. You would have felt fine sitting in the same row. That would have been fine. If you knew them personally, like you were friends, you might have sat right next to them, and you might have felt just fine doing that. If you were closer friends, or this is like, I know like the young guys in the room are giggling, but intimate doesn't have to mean intimate, right? Intimate could just be you know them very well. But there you go, right? So if you have a spouse or a really good friend, like they could whisper in your ear, I don't think this guy knows what he's talking about. But if that was someone you didn't know, and they just whispered up in your ear, hey, what do you think of that guy? Like that would be really awkward, right? And he just said, these numbers change a little bit if you're in a different culture. Like, so if you go to Europe or somewhere, like these numbers may change a little bit, but he said they found these spaces pretty much across the board. And what he also found is that in order to get to this space, you have to come through these spaces. In other words, you can't jump from here to here, apart from an external influence. So, St. Patty's Day being just past us. But what happens when someone jumps from there to there? I mean, if you see someone jump from there to there, is that awkward? Do you feel like we need to do something? We need to say something? That's not socially acceptable, right? That's why you have, the wingman kind of thing back in the day when I was in college. Like that's why you had those things. We don't do that. We go this way, right? And so what's interesting about that, why are we talking about this? This seems arbitrary. Because we're talking about community, right? And for us, where do you think that community group fits on this chart of intimacy? So intimacy is growing as we go down here. We've said we can't make this leap. Where do you think community groups sit on this scale? So a lot of times I hear that. A lot of times we go social. We say they're social. Why do we say social? We say, well, because a lot of times we don't get too deep and we're just talking on a social level. But let's take it back a little bit to the question that we had earlier today, which was, what do you do if one of the barriers, I'm going to keep moving on that camera, what do you do if one of the barriers is that people find it hard to come into your home, right? Is it common in Orange County for people that you know at work to come into your home? Is that common? Do your neighbors come over a lot? It's not very common, okay? And that's kind of what I expect. It's not a very common practice. Why? Because that's a very intimate space. Who comes into your home? Who do you know that does come into your home? Your family comes into your home, right? Or your really good friends come into your home. Some of you've known for a long time. But the people that you just met or the people that you've met, you could work with the same people for 10 years and still never have them into your home. Or longer. Or longer. And still never have them to home. So coming into someone's, just the idea of coming into your living room already brings it down the scale, does it not? And then let's just add in 12 of your closest Christian friends to talk about Jesus. You kind of get it? That what we're asking them to do from their perspective is we're asking them to come into this type of situation. We're saying, will you come into my living room with with my brothers and sisters in Christ, which they may already find a Christianese weird saying, and would you like to be a part of what we're doing? And so we're asking them, either from getting to know them, whether we run into the neighbors out in the neighborhood, or they come into this setting, and we're saying, would you make that leap? And what happens is, one, most of the time, they're not going to be willing to make that leap. And two, we anticipate that because we know these rules. These are unwritten rules, but we understand these rules, that you don't go from public to intimate overnight, that it takes time. We intrinsically understand this. And so we know, well, that's just awkward to ask them to do that, so we're just going to avoid asking them in the first place. So what we need to do, when we talk about kind of practically trying to figure out how to engage with evangelism and mission within our community, is we've got to figure out, how do we begin to make these little leaps rather than trying to make this one big leap. And so that's why when you read the book, what we talk about is, I just adapted these spaces with a pretty simple intent. The intent was, how do I help my community group understand these spaces in terms of what we can actually do and engage with people with? And so when we talk about this deep, intimate space, this is what I call fellowship. And fellowship is like that typical kind of maybe the dream community group that you want to have, right? That's that intimate, pray for one another, share our concerns, study the Bible, really live life together. That's the fellowship aspect of our community. We can't get people to jump from there to there, so should we get rid of this? Of course not, right? Like, this is where we're headed. This is the target. This is where we want. This is what we want to experience. So we're not interested in getting rid of this. We're just saying we need to build some bridges to get there. Okay, and so we still want to have deep fellowship, intimate fellowship, but we also want to have some other spaces. And all that means is we want to exist in different, in a different atmosphere, maybe a different place, or a different opportunity for people to engage in. And so the kind of personal space that we talk about, I'm about to write fellowship again, but I should have wrote hospitality. Is we're just calling hospitality. So, what do you think hospitality means? Pretty self-explanatory. Yeah, making someone feel welcomed. So when we talk about trying to understand a space of hospitality, what we're saying is we're just acknowledging that the energy barrier that needs to be crossed to get to here is really high. So what if we had some opportunities, some events where our focus was, rather than on fellowship, our focus was on hospitality? That what we're really trying to do is just create a space, a welcoming space for people to come in and be a part of our community. So as we're talking about this, we're going to keep talking about our community, not just us individually. Like, this isn't just me and my wife creating a hospitable place. It's how do we, as a community, become a hospitable community? How do we open up opportunities for that? So this is our typical, you hear this in community talks all the time. This is barbecues, hangouts. Like, this is invite people over to watch the tournament. Making it, then they can all be sad and cry together. But the idea is, what would be comfortable for someone to come in, even though this right here is still on our turf. It's inviting them into our world. Okay? So the first step for any group to kind of move out of just caring about ourselves and Bible study and care is to, can we provide a hospitable place where I can invite somebody to? Because this is super intimidating and might be that awkward place, or might be that place that we're a little embarrassed by. But can we fill the space? Can we create something that people would be willing to come to? Our neighbors would be willing to come to. All right? Now, this is still what I would call inward. Whoops, you're not going to be able to read that, but this is inward. But we want to start to move outward as we engage in our neighborhoods. And so the first space in outward is service. And the reason that I went with service is because as I'm trying to move my community that has been, if I have a community group that's been stuck in a rut of doing kind of Bible study and care, and we've had this rut for a while, as I move them outward, this is a pretty big barrier for them, right? Is getting out of our house or getting out of like what's comfortable for us. So I wanted to actually give them something to do. So I didn't want them to just go like, hey, our first step out there is going to be to just be. I want like, let's do something. Let's move towards being active in loving our neighborhood or loving our city or loving our region or loving our county, right? Figuring out a way that we're going to serve other people. Now, when we talk about service, here's what's really cool about service is that one way we can serve is that we can go out and we can do something that's helpful for the neighborhood, right? We can go clean the sidewalks or weed the playground, or we can engage somewhere there. But what's cool is we can actually invite our neighbors to do that service with us, because it's outward. So whereas hospitality is like inviting neighbors in, service is something where we can partner with them. We begin to partner with them to do service. So an example of service, and we'll go back through all of these and just try to think of examples of this, but I had a group once that I was working with that it had several guys that were really into working on cars, and so what they wanted to do with their community group is part of their rhythm that we're going to talk about later. Part of the rhythm was like, we just want to work on cars together, and there's some single moms in the neighborhood that need some help. What we want to do is start providing a service for those moms to say, if you need an oil change or something wrong with your car, our community group is just going to help fix those cars for free. And you can just bring, just let us know, and we'll do that as part of service to the neighborhood. Now, when they started doing that and they're getting to know the rest of their neighbors, they found other neighbors that were really into working on cars, right? Non-believers, just neighbors that like to work on cars. That's a pretty easy sell, don't you think? Hey, would you like to work on cars with us? What are you doing? Well, we've got some single moms in the neighborhood that need help. Would you like to help us work on their cars? Well, of course. That'd be, that's a noble thing, regardless of your relationship to Jesus. And so they were able to start serving, able to serve the neighborhood and serve these folks in the neighborhood that had a deep need, and they were able to do it alongside their neighbors that didn't know Jesus yet. You can imagine the amount of conversations that came out of that. Why are we doing this again? Right? Man, you guys give up, you guys sacrifice a lot to do this. That seems different. Other people aren't doing it. Why are you doing that, right? All of a sudden, these questions, not only the people being served are being loved by Jesus through the community, but the people in the neighborhood that get an opportunity to serve with them are being blessed in the same way. And so service opportunities can actually give us a lot of different opportunities in interacting with our neighbors. Okay? And then the last one is participation, and these are in your notes. So what's participation? Participation is, one, it's the realization that as a church, we don't have to recreate everything. We don't have to create a Christian version of everything going on in our culture. Things that are happening in your neighborhoods that you could participate in. So an example might be, for a while, the church I was at was doing, great idea, they were doing a harvest party. It was a harvest party where children dressed up in costumes and got candy, but it was called a harvest party. If your church has a harvest party, let me be the first to tell you, that's a Halloween party. It's okay. call it what you want, but if there's candy and dressing up kids, it's Halloween. So they were throwing. I didn't mean to blow up some categories for you, especially for the pastors. So they were throwing a big event at the church. That was actually a really cool blessing for the local neighborhood that it was in. But what I found was that my community group that was in a few neighborhoods out, that we were all leaving our neighborhood and going to the church harvest party. While that was happening, the community center in my neighborhood was throwing a Halloween party. And we were leaving our neighborhood, where all our neighbors were at, celebrating and having fun, and we were going to the church to do this party. See the problem there? Besides the motorcycle that's driving along right now? So what we found ourselves, we were leaving our mission field and missing out on a great opportunity that what we could have done is we could have just participated in the party that was happening right in our own neighborhood. But instead we had developed this own like Christian version of that. And I'm not against throwing those type of harvest parties or whatever you want to call them. And I think those can be great outreaches to the community. And at Sojourn, we do those type of events. But what I was convicted by is like, hey, when there's a competition between what we're doing at the church and what the neighborhood is doing, and we have an opportunity to engage and just participate in what they're doing, like I should be there. And so, like, in that particular neighborhood, we had events like this. We had, like, a chili cook-off, and we had Halloween event, and we had a community center. Your neighborhood might not have that. But your neighborhood might have a school, and that school might have events. Or maybe your homeowners association or something has something, or something in the neighborhood. There may be things that are happening that you could say, you know, why don't we participate in that? Like, anyone ever heard of International Night Out? So every year across the entire country, there is a concerted effort to have, it's called International Night Out, that if you call your local police department and say, I want to close off my block and throw a block party, they will do it for you. They do it like if you just look up Night Out, and it happens all across the country. The idea was, I believe the idea behind it was the way to get neighbors to know each other within neighborhoods, to reduce crime. That's what they were trying to do. But the cool thing about that is that it's already if you will, a city-sponsored or state-sponsored event. So if you as a community group just said, we're going to do one of those parties, we're going to do a block party, International Night Out. And then when you go to your neighbors, you can be like, hey, this is International Night Out. Here's the pamphlet. Here's what it's all about. Do you guys want to do this? And you can throw a block party and connect with people, participating in what is already going on, that's already being organized for us, right? And so there's a lot of things like that if we take the time to find them, they are there because there are people, not only are we concerned about building community within the church and engaging with our neighbors, there's a lot of people in our culture right now, in this, within Orange County, in the different cities that are trying to develop community because they know that it's important, even for a city, to develop community and have a sense of community. And even if you don't feel it and you feel like there's not a sense of community here, I can guarantee there are people who are working hard right now to try to build that in each of the little neighborhoods within Orange County. Someone is trying to do that. And you can find the books on them. People trying to figure out how do we address issues like crime and neighborhoods deteriorating, and the way they're trying to do that is figure out ways to build community. And so what we want to do is, rather than create our own version of those, we can also go around and figure out who's trying to do this and how do we participate in it. Does that make sense? Is anybody aware of any of those in your particular context? Things your schools are doing, neighborhoods? Awesome.
They have that problem with churches not showing up. Pass out flyers and not.
Yeah.
We committed 20 workers to work with game booths. So we're going to work the game booths. We've got like 28 people already volunteered.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I got to post to work everywhere. It's a
Yeah.
city-sponsored thing that we're able to do.
So the city's sponsoring a carnival, and they're able to go in and volunteer and say, yeah, we'll help run the games. We didn't have to create our own carnival. Carnival's already provided for us. They need help, so we can just come alongside and show, hey, how can we help you as a church? Not only are you going to bless the people from that neighborhood, but you're also blessing the leaders of the city, like the council or whoever's putting together that event, and they're saying, oh, there's something different about this community. Yeah.
My church is in Fullerton, just north of here, and they have a project every year called Love Fullerton, and they have this year over 100 different volunteer service projects that you can participate in.
So in Fullerton, they've got a list of 100 different service projects that you can participate in, a program called Love Fullerton. Just cities already put this together and looking for volunteers to do that, right? In Seattle, there were actually people who had jobs that their job was to fill volunteer spots for projects like that. And so what we did is we just said, well, let's get to know that guy, right? We've got a captive audience of volunteers, and this is the ways that we can participate and serve, depending on what that event is. So, like, if there's a music festival in the neighborhood, we can be there as a group, not just me as an individual. I can take my group and invite my neighbors. Hey, we're all going to, going to the carnival, or we're all going to a music fest. We're all doing that. We're participating. So does that make sense? Can you guys think of places or ideas, or like, where do you go to find those? So you can go to Chamber of Commerce, City Hall, go to your school, ask around at the school. Takes a little bit of work, right? I hear other whispers. You guys got other ideas?
Some neighborhoods have a neighborhood website or a
Neighborhood blog or website or Twitter feed. Facebook. That's so 1990. Twitter's for old people like me now, right? So you can Snapchat it. Just kidding. Trying to sound cool. It's not working. So yeah, look on so here's the deal. We talked about as leaders, like, okay, it's going to take some leading, and so this is where that effort gets tough. If we want to move and be more engaged with our community, we're going to have to do the legwork. We're going to have to go ask and find out what's going on. But is that more exciting than logging in to get the questions for the week? Like, do you guys get a little bit more excited about, like, oh, wow, like, okay, I feel like I'm doing something here. I'm trying to figure it out. I'm getting to know people. I'm building a network. I'm reaching out. To me, that's more exciting. Now, it's harder work. But when we understand our motivation, that's no longer up there, but we understand our motivation, it's like, oh, wow. Like, each leader is an integral part of what God is trying to do at your church. And the more we take ownership of that and go, okay, I want to figure these things out and figure out what the needs are. Like, in order to move into service, we got to know what the needs are, right? In order to participate, we got to know what the problems are. In order to move into hospitality, we've got to just create the space, okay? And I would argue this is the first step to get your people comfortable while you're researching this, and then the next step is to move into participation. Where do you answer the question, what are the needs in the community? How do you figure those out? Get in community. So we can study, look at the newspaper. Those are very non-invasive, relationalist ways to do that, yes. Yeah. You can ask people, right? Have conversations. Newspaper, great. Look on the website, that's great. Talk to people, right? Like, figure out who would understand these neighborhoods. And this is good practice for you, right? So your group may feel uncomfortable talking to people they don't know. You may be as uncomfortable or more. So if you want to lead them into that place of being like engaging with people, you could lead by going in and having conversations with folks that you don't know. What's the safest place that you can think of to ask those conversations? How many of you got a coffee this morning? How many of you did? That's it? That's all the people that got coffee this morning? A green tea, or like, how many of you went to some form of coffee, tea establishment this morning? Oh, up there, everyone's right. Right, well, at least half of us have, right? If you want to understand a neighborhood, if you want to understand what's going on in the neighborhood, who lives in the neighborhood, what the needs of the neighborhood are, your barista might know a lot about the neighborhood. Your barista know who lives in the neighborhood because they're the ones that come in every morning. They generally know what's going on in the neighborhood. And they're generally, the only time they're talked to is if you accidentally put soy milk instead of non-fat milk in their latte, right? So if you actually took time to just say, hey, I come in here every week, I'm trying to understand the neighborhood a little bit more, like, who lives in this neighborhood? Who do you think lives in this neighborhood? I would be surprised if you ever had someone not want to join you in that conversation. Most of the time, people are very excited that someone's actually taking the time to talk to them and get their opinion, right? Who else knows a lot about your neighborhood? What's that? Realtors. So if you know any realtors, you could ask them. They're always walking around. What else? You ask the police. Talk to the police. They're in the neighborhood all the time. What's that? You can talk to the fire station. It's right. You talk to teachers, right? Teachers have a really good understanding of what's happening in the neighborhood. Other people that you generally ignore, but if you can find a grocery store that still has checkout people, that doesn't just do it automatically. It is amazing now. You can go to the bank and get money. You can go to the store and get food, and you never have to talk to people. You ever notice what's going on culturally? Like, anyone been to like what's the airport in New York? LaGuardia. Anyone been to LaGuardia recently? Half the restaurants you don't actually talk to a person. Like sit-down restaurants, you just go and sit down, take the screen, order your food, and the only time you see a person is when they walk by and drop the tray. And you can pay and everything. Like, you never talk to anybody. It's really weird. So when you get those opportunities, like so what we've been talking about is, for the most part, a pretty dramatic shift in the way we do community. This vision is generally bigger than do a Bible study, right? But here's what I want to encourage you with, is that you don't have to make an extra trip to the grocery store, an extra trip to the coffee shop. You may want to because it's an excuse, but you don't have to take extra trips. It's like, hey, I'm in the coffee shop. Oh, I remember that guy who didn't have very good jokes told me I should talk to baristas. So I'm just going to talk, like, hey, tell me about the neighborhood. Or I'm checking my stuff out, and I remember, oh yeah, I should ask this lady about what she thinks the issues in this neighborhood are, or where where service opportunities are. And so, like, just taking just natural opportunities as they come. The idea is to get yourself thinking on a consistent, natural basis. I'm leading this community somewhere, and so I'm always a leader. I'm always thinking about how to help them and how to engage in the neighborhood. And then beyond, like, those kind of public places, asking your specific neighbors, right? So talking to your neighbors and just saying, hey, have you seen any service opportunities? I got a group of people. We're just trying to figure out ways to bless the neighborhood. Do you know anything that we could do? Do you have anything that you need done? We had in our neighborhood, we had a lady whose husband died unexpectedly, got sick and went really quick, and at the same time, she had to take custody of her daughter's child. And so she's finding herself in her mid-60s trying to raise a child, and her husband just passed away. And it's like, oh gosh, we didn't know that. But now I've got a community group of people that we can just figure out, like, how to help with babysitting, how to help with groceries, and just, like, give her a relief to like get out of the house from time to time. and we just had to ask. Oh, we didn't know that was going on, so let's go see how we can help. And so as we think about how to build a life-giving group, right? How to build a group that gives life, and I believe one of the things that brings believers life, that gives them life, is when we engage with God's mission, what God is doing, and this is a way in which we start giving a very clear, helpful way for our group to understand. Hey, we're going to do some service every once in a while. And we're going to look for opportunities, and we're going to serve together. This is part of what it means to be in community. When opportunities come to just participate in the neighborhood, if anybody in our group, if anybody knows of an opportunity for us to just kind of be in the group, in the neighborhood or in the city together, if you got some ideas, like, let's go do that. Let's learn to participate together, and then let's start thinking about how we can provide these opportunities. Because what happens is, so I told you about my neighbors and I going. Did I tell you this story? Did I tell you our St. Patty's Day plan? So I was supposed to leave here Thursday. But we had made plans for St. Patty's Day for a community group. So our community group for a season, I was pushing them into that, like, hey, just relax a little bit. Let's get to know each other. And then we started saying, let's engage in mission. We haven't done that in a while. Let's figure out a way that we can engage evangelistically with the neighbors. And so we batted around some ideas, and one idea was like, well, let's have a barbecue here at the house and invite everybody to come. And then it was like, well, what about like St. Patrick's Day? Should we invite people over here to hang out? And as we were having that conversation, I remembered that one of the neighbors across the street had just opened up his own brewery. And so the idea came up, well, why don't we plan on going to his brewery, and we'll invite all of the folks in the neighborhood who are on our street. We've got a little cul-de-sac. Like, let's invite people from the cul-de-sac to see if they would want to go with us. And of course they did, right? It was like, well, yeah, we know Brian. Oh, yeah, we haven't been to his place yet. Well, we're all going to go there for St. Patty's Day. And so I ended up changing my flight so that I could stay and do that, because it was an opportunity for us to engage with our neighbors in a very participatory event, right? We're just going to go, we're going to hang out there, we're going to frequent his establishment, and we're going to get to know our neighbors. Well, now that we've met some of those neighbors, and this is how the whole thing works together, right? So we've met those neighbors, and, they're like, they got to meet Matt, and they got to meet Paul, and they got to meet these folks from my community group, right? So they got to meet Elise, and they got to meet Robert and Karen, and so they got to meet all of these people from my community group. Now when an opportunity comes up that we see a service opportunity, like, the neighborhood association does a cleanup and we want to participate in that cleanup, we can go to our neighbors and say, hey, we're gonna organize that cleanup, and want to know if you want to do it. You know Robert and Karen, you met them when we went and hung out for St. Patty's Day. They're going to be there, so you already know them. And Matt and Elise will be there too. So do you want to come hang out with us and do the street cleanup? And you see how we just made that leap? We knew them in this public. They met our community together in that public space. They got to know them as we just hung out and talked basketball. Now we're able to invite them into a service opportunity. Now we're doing things together. Now the next time we go, hey, we're just going to have a barbecue at our house. It's a more intimate space. They're not coming onto our turf. But we can have that same conversation. Oh, yeah. Now they're asking me, are Robert and Karen going to be there? Oh, yeah, they'll be there. I'm like, oh, yeah, I like those. They were really fun. I'm like, yeah, well, why don't you show up? And you see how now we're building through those levels of intimacy. Does that make sense? And so when we go into these areas, it doesn't mean that everybody from your community group always has to be at every event, right? It could be 4 of you. It could be 8 of you. It could be 6 of you, whatever. The idea is that we're starting to build relationships so that we can start making these connections. And the idea is that we can grow in intimacy and eventually be able to have those conversations where they're asking us why we do what we do, and they get to know Jesus. Cool? So let's take a 5-minute break, and we get back. We're going to talk about how we put this all together into a rhythm for group, okay?